High above the Black Hills of South Dakota, Mount Rushmore rises out of the granite with four enormous faces carved into the mountain: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln. From a distance, it can almost seem as though it has always belonged there, with the faces rising out of the rock like part of the landscape itself. But the scale tells a very different story. The noses are taller than a person, the eyes are nearly the size of a small room, and every detail had to be measured, blasted, drilled, and shaped by hand. Long before modern computer-guided machinery, workers used ropes, drills, dynamite, and careful measurements to turn a rugged mountain into one of the most recognizable monuments in the world. But Mount Rushmore was not carved by calm artists, standing safely on the ground with tiny chisels. It was blasted out of the mountain with dynamite. Men hung from ropes in small swing-like seats, hundreds of feet in the air, while drills shook in their hands and granite dust filled the space around them. Explosions echoed through the hills. Rock tumbled down the mountainside. And slowly, almost impossibly, faces began to emerge from the stone. Behind the famous monument is a story of ambition, danger, politics, money problems, unfinished plans, and a land that already carried deep meaning long before anyone carved presidents into it. Before Mount Rushmore became a national symbol, the Black Hills were already a place of beauty, memory, and spiritual importance. Long before tourists arrived with cameras, and long before workers climbed the cliffs with ropes and drills, the Black Hills were known and valued by native peoples, especially the Lakota. To the Lakota, the Black Hills were not just scenery. They were sacred. They were part of history, identity, and a deep connection to the world around them. That is important to remember, because Mount Rushmore's story is not only about engineering and art, it is also about the complicated history of America itself, where national ambition and indigenous history meet in the same place. In the early 1920s, South Dakota had incredible scenery, but not enough people were traveling there to see it. The Black Hills had towering rock formations, forests, valleys, wildlife, and dramatic landscapes. Yet state historian Doane Robinson wanted something that would make people come from all over the country. He imagined a huge mountain carving that could turn South Dakota into a major tourist destination. At first, the idea was not to carve presidents at all. Robinson imagined carving famous figures of the American West into the Needles, a group of tall, narrow granite formations in the Black Hills. He thought explorers, frontier figures, and Western legends would attract visitors. But then he contacted a sculptor named Gutzon Borglum, and Borglum did not think small. Gutzon Borglum was bold, intense, difficult, creative, and ambitious. He had already worked on a huge mountain carving project at Stone Mountain in Georgia, so he understood the scale of this kind of work. He also understood something many people did not. If a monument was going to last, and if people were going to cross the country to see it, it could not just be local. It had to be national. Borglum took the original idea and pushed it in a much bigger direction. Instead of Western heroes, he wanted to carve presidents. Not small statues, and not decorative figures, but giant faces that could be seen from miles away and remembered for generations. He chose George Washington to represent the birth of the United States, Thomas Jefferson to represent expansion, Theodore Roosevelt to represent development and America entering the modern world, and Abraham Lincoln to represent preservation, the Civil War, and the Union being held together. Choosing the presidents was only the beginning. Now they had to choose the mountain. The original Needles location was too narrow and fragile for the kind of carving Borglum imagined, so he needed solid granite, strong sunlight, and enough space for four enormous faces. That search led him to Mount Rushmore, a granite mountain in the Black Hills that faced the morning sun and offered the giant stone canvas he was looking for. Mount Rushmore had already been named after Charles E. Rushmore, a New York lawyer who had visited the area in the 1880s. But at that time, it was just one mountain among many in the Black Hills. Borglum saw something different. To most people, it was a rock wall. To him, it was a sculpture waiting to be released. The mountain faced southeast, so the morning sun would light up the faces, and the granite was strong enough to hold the monument he imagined. On October 4th, 1927, carving officially began. Almost immediately, the project became far more difficult than a simple monument. One of the biggest challenges was money. Mount Rushmore needed government support, private donations, political backing, equipment, roads, workers, and years of patience. Funding came in waves. Sometimes the work moved forward, sometimes it slowed, and sometimes the whole project seemed uncertain. Then there was the challenge of the mountain itself. Granite is not soft, and it does not simply fall away. Because an artist has a beautiful idea, every inch had to be measured, blasted, drilled, shaped, and smoothed. Borglum could not just walk up to the mountain and draw faces on it. He needed a system, so he created large plaster models of the presidents' heads. Measurements from these models were then transferred to the mountain using a method called the pointing system. The idea was simple in theory, but enormous in practice. If 1 inch on the model represented 1 foot on the mountain, workers could use measurements to know exactly where stone had to be removed. It was like copying a drawing, except the drawing was a mountain, the canvas was granite, and the eraser was dynamite. Dynamite was the real secret behind Mount Rushmore. Many people imagine the monument was slowly carved with tiny chisels, but most of the stone was removed by controlled explosions. Skilled workers drilled holes into the granite, placed dynamite inside, and blasted away large sections of rock. This was not random destruction. It had to be precise. Too little dynamite would barely make a difference, but too much could ruin part of a president's face forever. The blasters became incredibly skilled. They could remove huge amounts of granite and still stop within inches of the final surface. Imagine standing on the mountain, looking at a rough wall of stone, knowing that somewhere inside, it was the face of George Washington. To find it, workers had to remove everything that was not Washington. That was the job. Day after day, local miners, drillers, and laborers climbed the mountain, many of them simply trying to earn a living during difficult times. The work was dangerous. Men hung from cables in bosun chairs, which were small, swing-like seats suspended from the top of the mountain. From those seats, they operated heavy pneumatic drills against the granite. The drills were loud, the air was dusty, and the mountain vibrated beneath them. A wrong move could have been deadly. And yet, during the entire carving period, not a single worker died from the work on the mountain. When you picture what they were doing, that is almost unbelievable. After dynamite removed the rough stone, workers used a method called honeycombing. They drilled many small holes close together into the granite, then knocked away the remaining stone between the holes. This allowed them to shape the finer details of the faces. The eyes, noses, lips, cheeks, and brows were slowly refined, and after that, workers smoothed the surface, removing drill marks and leaving behind the pale granite faces people recognize today. The first face to take shape was George Washington. Washington was the largest and most central figure in Borglum's plan, and as his face emerged from the mountain, the project began to feel real. It was no longer just a dream, a political promise, or a sketch on paper. A president was appearing in stone. Washington's head was dedicated in 1930, giving the world its first real glimpse of what Mount Rushmore could become. But the project was far from finished. and Thomas Jefferson did not appear easily. Originally, Jefferson was planned for Washington's right side. Workers began carving him there, but the rock turned out to be poor quality, with cracks and weaknesses that made it unsuitable. So the partly carved Jefferson had to be blasted away. They had started carving a president and then had to erase him from the mountain with explosives. Jefferson was moved to Washington's left side, where we see him today. Theodore Roosevelt came next, tucked deeper into the mountain between Jefferson and Lincoln. His position made him harder to carve because he was set farther back in the rock. His glasses, mustache, and facial details created extra challenges for the workers. Then came Abraham Lincoln, with his deep-set eyes, strong brow, and serious expression. As each face appeared, the monument became more recognizable, and tourists began visiting even before it was finished, watching history being blasted into shape. But Borglum's dream was even bigger than what we see today. He did not originally want just 4 heads. He imagined the presidents carved down to their waists, with coats, collars, and hands. He also wanted a giant inscription on the mountain, called the entablature, which would tell important events from American history. When that idea proved difficult, he began another plan, the Hall of Records. The Hall of Records was supposed to be a hidden chamber behind the faces, a place where documents and records could explain the meaning of the monument to future generations. Borglum worried that thousands of years later, people might look at the faces and not know who they were, or why they had been carved. He wanted Mount Rushmore to speak not only through faces, but through words. Workers began cutting into the mountain behind the sculpture, creating the beginning of the chamber. But the Hall of Records was never completed the way Borglum imagined. Funding problems and government pressure forced the project to focus on finishing the faces instead. Then, in March 1941, everything changed. Gutzon Borglum died, and his son, Lincoln Borglum, took over the final stages of the work. The project had already been running for 14 years. Money was limited, America was moving closer to World War II, and the grand dream of full upper bodies, inscriptions, and a completed Hall of Records faded away. On October 31st, 1941, Mount Rushmore was declared complete. It was not finished exactly as Borglum had imagined, but it was complete. The mountain now held 4 enormous faces, each around 60 feet high, carved into granite above the Black Hills. From a distance, the monument looked calm and permanent, as if it had always been there. But up close, its history was anything but calm. Mount Rushmore was built through explosions, risk, dust, arguments, ambition, and years of uncertain funding. It took hundreds of workers, political support, engineering skill, and stubborn determination. For many Americans, it became a symbol of national pride, representing presidents, democracy, perseverance, and the scale of American ambition. But for many Native people, especially the Lakota, the monument stands in the Black Hills, land with sacred meaning and a painful history of broken promises and conflict. That makes Mount Rushmore more than just a tourist attraction. It is a place where different parts of history meet. The story of Mount Rushmore is a story of art and engineering, American identity, land, memory, and who gets to decide what is carved into history. Today, millions of people visit the mountain, look up at the faces, and wonder how human hands could create something so huge. The answer is almost unbelievable. They did it with scale models and measurements, ropes and bosun chairs, drills and jackhammers, and dynamite placed carefully into granite. Mount Rushmore may look still and silent today, but its creation was loud. It shook the hills, sent clouds of dust into the air, and turned a mountain into a monument. Whether people see it as inspiring, controversial, complicated, or all of those things at once, one thing is certain. Mount Rushmore was not simply carved. It was fought out of stone,